Playful knowledge transfer as a response to crises. You will soon join training on disinformation. You won't be forced to do anything against your beliefs, so choose your character and decide which side you want to fight for: trolls or elves. These are the opening words of the gamified interactive web documentary Trolls vs. Elves from 2024, which deals with the activities of disinformation-spreading internet trolls on the one hand, and cyber activists called cyber elves on the other. The project uses game elements in a documentary context to explain real issues such as the disinformation narratives surrounding the war in Ukraine. Topics in the web documentary include the war in Ukraine, disinformation about refugees from Ukraine, and memetic warfare, which refers to warfare through the spread of memes on social media. Disinformation is central to information warfare. This is particularly evident in the case of Russian troll farms in the European media landscape, which attempt to interfere in political opinions and decisions. This raises several questions. How can interactive practices of audiovisual knowledge transfer respond to crises such as war and disinformation? How can we intervene in the chaos? What possibilities exist to increase mental resistance to manipulation? In the following, using the example of Trolls vs. Elves, I argue that the playful knowledge transfer in interactive web documentaries can respond to crises by making complex contexts experienceable and enabling users to try actions in media environments that prepare them for challenges in real life. To this end, I will first explain what interactive web documentaries are, what gamification means, and where the differences between them and serious games lie. After a brief digression on my method, I will then analyze Trolls vs. Elves with regard to firstly, the reference to reality and forms of simulation, secondly, the potential for knowledge transfer, and thirdly, the potential for intervention. Interactive web documentaries belong to the form of so-called interactive documentaries, or iDocs for short. A definition by 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿 reads as follows: any project that starts with an intention to document the real and that does so by using digital interactive technology can be considered an interactive documentary, iDoc. This definition does not consider the iDoc as an evolution of linear documentary in the age of digital media, but as a new form that uses interactivity to position the viewer within the iDoc itself, demanding her to play an active role in the reconstruction, representation, and negotiation of the facts it wants to convey. It is therefore not about interactive technologies being used exclusively for distribution, but about interactivity having an impact on the way the projects function. Linear documentary films on the web, for example, are not meant. The interaction options offered vary from project to project. As Samuel Gontier notes, some iDocs intend to create a game-like concept using various mechanisms. Such projects are gamified. The term gamification describes, and I quote, the use of game design elements in non-game contexts. End of quote. Gamified iDocs can, for example, use objectives, rules, competitive elements, and feedback systems to present documentary content within an interactive experience. These are not traditional games, but projects with game elements in a documentary context. In this context, a growing interest in social and journalistic issues can be observed. The fact that players take on a role within modeled environments is a central difference between simulations and pure representations of documentary content. Kate Nash distinguishes conceptual simulations, meaning dynamic modeling and interactions with processes, from realistic simulations, which offer detailed virtual environments for exploration. In the case of Trolls vs. Elves, the former applies. The users become part of a training program that reacts to their interactions. There are many interactive web documentaries that deal with cyber war and fake news. At this point, I would like to mention just two more examples that are fully fledged browser-based documentary games, also known as serious games, to illustrate the difference to gamification. Serious games are used for educational purposes. They can be part of industrial or state training measures used in planning or research. #Hacked is a documentary game developed by 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿𝗰𝘁 about the cyber war in Syria. It reveals the persecution of people in Syria and the stealing of sensitive military information by viruses and malware. For example, opponents of the Assad regime were tortured based on information taken from their emails. Another topic of the game is the interception of government troops. The web project includes not only playful elements such as a score, but also a game objective that turns it into a documentary game. The aim is to collect as much data as possible in a given time for a report that will serve as the basis for banning the export of espionage equipment to Syria. Taking on the role of investigative journalists, the players have 5 virtual days to research the hidden conflict, for example through simulated chats based on actual conversations. Among other things, they encounter representations of hackers and activists who provide information about the effects of hacking on the war. Most of them exist in reality. Users collect points by conducting interviews, which works by watching videos with the protagonists. During the game, players have to watch out for simulated hacker attacks. Another full-fledged documentary game is the Bad News game by the Dutch organization DROG in cooperation with the University of Cambridge. This game simulates a chatbot that persuades players to gain as many followers as possible through targeted false reports, and in order to do so, initially boost their credibility. A loss of credibility leads to losing the game. The game's website explains the intention, and I quote, "The goal of the game is to expose the tactics and manipulation techniques that are used to mislead people and build up a following. Bad news works as a psychological vaccine against disinformation. Playing it builds cognitive resistance against common forms of manipulation that you may encounter online." End of quote. The idea of cognitive inoculation is particularly relevant to my contribution because it is also intended in Trolls vs. Elves, as I will show later. First, I would like to briefly outline my methodological approach to analyzing Trolls vs. Elves. Methodologically, the study examines the interaction possibilities on 2 levels. The first level relates to the replication of processes in the larger structure. At this level, the navigation concept and its representation via the interface play a central role. The second level focuses on the transformation of social action into intramedial action. For this investigation of individual interaction possibilities, form, context, and purpose must be examined. Analyzing the form means asking what kind of media action, in other words, what physical action, the individual interaction offer prompts the user to take. The analysis of the context examines where within the web documentary the interaction offer is presented to the user. And finally, the category of the purpose of interactivity includes the analysis of the function of the interaction element in the documentary context. One example is personalization. These 3 dimensions relate to the media manifestation itself, but cannot help identify the practices behind it. A qualitative guided interview that I conducted with the initiator Aleksandra Rydzkowska on January 13, 2025, therefore additionally provides information about the intentions and practices in the development of the project. The following analysis focuses on 3 aspects: reference to reality and simulation, knowledge transfer, and intervention, reference to reality and forms of simulation. Interactive web documentaries are characterized by reference to reality that can take different forms. This does not only concern a representation of reality, but also the practices with which the reference is created. Simulations can also have a documentary character. What is even more important in the context of this contribution is that interactive documentary projects can also intervene in reality, as I will analyze later. Trolls vs. Elves begins with the choice of an avatar. Users can take a training course in the role of an internet troll or cyber elf. This playful element, which is intended to put users in a role, already has a reference to reality. While both groups introduce themselves audiovisually, reference is made to real activities of the groups. The cyber activists called cyber elves, for example, actually monitor social media posts and expose fake news. The alienated visual representation, nevertheless, creates distance so that the simulation remains recognizable as such. The structure of the so-called training is then the same for both avatars. First, the respective movement is presented. In the case of the cyber elves, by the real representatives. In the case of the trolls, partly by actors and scripted interviews, which are, however, inspired by real testimonies. This is followed by the section The War, which presents interviews with real experts who talk about topics such as the war in Ukraine, the information war, and the situation of refugees. Unlike in a traditional documentary, they are offered in a fragmented form for selection in different categories. This second level of training in the trolls mode is made plausible by the fact that trolls have to create credible disinformation to reach many people, and that it is therefore necessary to learn something about, for example, the war in Ukraine during training. In the Elves mode, this knowledge is necessary to be able to recognize disinformation. The content is the same, just differently framed. The third level, how to spread chaos in the Trolls mode and how to expose lies in the Elves mode, visualizes data from Twitter on the hashtag #𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿. The aim is to learn how disinformation campaigns spread on social media. #𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿 is a term used in conspiracy theories that assume that a takeover of Poland by Ukraine is imminent. With the help of 1,500 real tweets, including all data and links to the sources visualized by a data visualization expert for Trolls vs. Elves, it is possible to experience how a real disinformation campaign has spread within a short period. The Trolls mode is about learning these techniques. The Elves mode is about learning how to debunk them. In the last level of the training, the ultimate challenge, users have to prove their acquired knowledge in a quiz in order to successfully complete the training and receive a personalized certificate. The training is further simulated by giving the users feedback on their performance from the respective group, trolls or elves. All questions in the quiz also relate to real events and contexts. One example is a question about the difference between the cyber elves and Anonymous. This brief overview of the overall structure of the project shows how different content with a reference to reality is conveyed within the simulated training. In addition, simulations also exist at the level of individual interaction offers, whereby this is supported by multimediality. For example, online research is imitated via the user interface, such as researching with the help of a search engine or on a video platform. The initiator, Aleksandra Rydzkowska, explained in an interview that she wanted to replicate the mechanisms on the internet to enable users to select search results in a protected environment and put them into context. This should sensitize them to the real challenges of browsing the internet. As can also be seen in other interaction offers of the web documentary, the aim is to initiate media actions that work like a trial or test and enable users to try things out. A good example of this is the fake news detection test in Trolls vs. Elves. The task is to assess the credibility of real tweets for which the links can be checked. As the internet has become an equivalent living space for some generations, This is a task that is part of everyday life for many people who encounter true and false news on social media. By giving the users of Trolls vs. Elves this task, both at the beginning of the web documentary and again at the end, they can experience how their media literacy has ideally improved. Throughout the web documentary, they learn how disinformation techniques can be exposed and should be able to recognize this information themselves at the end. The initiator explains, and I quote, Trolls vs. Elves challenges players to confront the complexities of the hybrid war in Ukraine while honing their media literacy skills. End of quote. Knowledge transfer. Instead of presenting prefabricated knowledge, the web documentary Trolls vs. Elves allows users to experience it interactively. By being trained as either trolls or cyber activists throughout the web documentary, they learn many details about the mechanisms underlying the spread of disinformation narratives about the war in Ukraine. Users discover how online propaganda functions as a component of warfare and how it is combated. According to the initiator Rydzkowska, the idea of designing Trolls vs. Elves as an interactive web documentary with game elements had the background that traditional fact-checking reports were too complex and received little attention. The project was therefore intended to offer a more immersive and effective alternative to this traditional form of knowledge transfer. To this end, Trolls vs. Elves uses various strategies to keep users' attention despite the complexity of the content and the large amount of informative material. The average running time is 1 hour 30 minutes, but can be extended to 8 hours for both game modes combined. Before I present the strategies of the web documentary, it should be mentioned that the project is primarily aimed at young people aged 16 and older, although Rydzkowska noted in the interview that it is possible to delve very deeply into the topics so that the project works differently for different target groups. To begin with, the structure of the web documentary is intended to ensure that users become curious and want to continue through the simulated training. To reach the next level, a certain percentage of the presented video and audio material must be received. Only then is the next level unlocked. In this way, users are almost forced to watch or listen to the interviews, for example. At the top left of the interface, the user can always see how much material he or she has already viewed. However, this requirement to interactively explore as much material as possible can also quickly lead to an interpassive behavior of overwhelmed users. According to Frederick Jaeger, too many options in nonlinear projects such as iDocs can lead to an inhibition of reflection and to a superficial perception. Considering the short attention span on the internet, the many videos and audio contributions in Trolls vs. Elves are more of an invitation to click through them quickly and gain brief impressions than to delve deeper into the content. At the same time, the interactive web documentary counteracts this form of reception by using the upcoming quiz to encourage people to really learn something. Especially if the project is to be used in the classroom and the certificate must be shown to the teacher at the end, there's no way around attentive reception. Anyone who does not reach the end in one reception session can save the score. This makes it possible to divide up the reception time individually, whereby the modularization makes it very easy to continue later. However, the project's affordances also help to keep users' attention. Each level offers different interaction options and materials. While the Our Movement level is about typing in search terms and watching videos, 2 levels later, for example, users are asked to interact with dots displayed in the data visualization to view the content of tweets, zoom in, and sort tweets by category. It was important to the initiator to create variety to promote knowledge transfer. In terms of knowledge transfer, it can therefore be said that the project enables the individual navigation of knowledge spaces and arouses interest in complex knowledge. Intervention. How can a documentary project such as Trolls vs. Elves intervene in the prevailing order? First, the development of an innovative format is itself a way of drawing attention to a topic. In the interview, the initiator explained regarding the users, maybe they are not curious about the topic itself, but they are curious about the form and will click a bit. End of quote. This can create awareness of the problem of disinformation narratives, even with a shorter reception time. The fact that all of the content in the interactive web documentary has a reference to reality and that false information actually being spread is uncovered means that the project also takes direct action against existing disinformation narratives, for example, about Ukrainian refugees. With this project, the initiator wants to support vulnerable groups who fall victim to the influence of disinformation. With the help of documentary full material, network analyses, and data visualizations, the project not only represents reality, but also intervenes in it. This goes so far that the web documentary ultimately asks players not to follow the troll's advice learned throughout the game and not to spread disinformation in real life. As with the bad news game, the idea behind this is to understand disinformation as a virus and to cognitively vaccinate users against it. The initiator explicitly refers to inoculation theory, which describes methods for making attitudes resistant to attempts to change them. How effective Trolls vs. Elves actually is in promoting critical thinking will be evaluated in the future in the web documentary itself through the fake news detection tests, in which users participate once before and once after reception. The test initially asks users where they see themselves politically on the scale, from very liberal, far left, to neutral, not political, and very conservative, far right. In summary, it can be said that the interactive web documentary, with its gamification, has the potential to make the mechanisms of disinformation campaigns experienceable for users, and at the same time to show them which disinformation is already circulating and how dangerous it is, for example, for vulnerable groups such as Ukrainian refugees. The project not only contributes to knowledge generation in an interactive form, but also actively combats disinformation narratives. Finally, the question remains as to whether it is not risky for the project to detail the tricks used by internet trolls in the information war. After all, they could be used by people with bad intentions to launch their own disinformation campaigns. However, this risk is rather low. Firstly, the interactive web documentary, similar to many comparable projects, only has a limited reach and already has difficulties in reaching the intended target groups. Secondly, the detailed information from Trolls vs. Elves about the tricks of the internet trolls can also be found from other sources, for example by searching the web. But what is the added value of the web documentary then? The answer is, it enables a simulated action within the medium by allowing users not just to read texts about the troll strategies, but to experience them interactively and apply the knowledge they have acquired in tests. This offers the potential for a deeper understanding of the mechanisms behind disinformation campaigns. Last but not least, it should be mentioned that interactive web documentaries are also well suited to intervening or responding to crises because they are often quicker and easier to produce than other documentary forms, such as feature-length films. In addition, they can potentially reach people worldwide. Even if Trolls vs. Elves has not reached a mass audience, the project can still intervene in the chaos of disinformation and memetic warfare in a targeted manner, for example, by working with schools. Media literacy, which is becoming increasingly important for democracies in the 21st century, can be promoted in a playful way, which however does not mean a reduction in complexity. As the analysis has also shown, new media forms and practices enable new ways of dealing with complexity.